All right. Hello, student leaders, and welcome to our SLCP Masterclass. My name is McKinley, and I am thrilled to be hosting you all tonight, along with our amazing presenter here, Jeff A.D. Martin. Before he gets into his presentation, I wanted to give you a quick intro as to who we are so lucky to have joining us this evening. So Jeff A.D. Martin is a soul-stirring, thought-provoking, and highly requested transformational speaker who has been using his platform to inspire people from around the world. Much of Jeff's love of people can be attributed to his years of involvement as a community advocate, a mentor, and over 15 years of experience in law enforcement as well. Jeff has worked as a police officer and in various investigative roles. He is a youth communications specialist, in fact, with over 1,000 forensic interviews with children. Jeff is also an author of 2 critically acclaimed books, a City of Toronto's best-selling children's book, Brothers from the Six/Sisters from the Six, Role Models in My Community, along with an Amazon best-selling personal development book, New Me, 10 Men, 10 Stories of Perseverance. Jeff is an award-winning professional speaker, a certified coach, a University of Guelph certified leadership professional. He has a Harvard University certificate in public speaking, and he is the curator of Inspire Legacy Community Online Academy, where he teaches the art of public speaking and student character development. With his career and life experiences, coupled with his benevolence and passion to inspire, Jeff A.D. Martin shares his gift of purpose and efforts to help others find their true potential. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jeff. Please join me in welcoming Jeff to the screen this evening.
Awesome, McKinley. Thank you so much. Hey, my friends who are tuning in at home, I'm so glad that you're here today. We're going to have a great conversation over the next number of minutes. I want to share a story with you that's a little bit embarrassing to me. So some time ago, I had to take my car to the mechanic. It was acting up, making some noises. And so when I got to the mechanic, I went inside and I brought my keys to the desk. And while I was there, I went to go sit down. And while I was there, I saw someone come out from the Bay Area where the cars are being fixed. It was a woman, and she was wearing a jumpsuit. And I asked, I said, is she a mechanic? And they said, yes, she is. And my friends, I got to tell you, in that moment, inside, I got so excited because I've been taking my cars to the mechanic for so long. And in all the mechanics I've seen, I've never seen a woman mechanic. So in that moment, I was like, you go, girl power. I was so excited on the inside. And then she walked over to where the keys were hanging and she grabbed a set of keys and it looked like my keys. So I asked, is she going to work on my car? And they said, yes, she is. And I got to tell you, in one moment, I was celebrating her. But in the second moment, the very next moment, I actually started to doubt her abilities. I asked myself, does she know what she's doing? My friends, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I brought my cars to the mechanic so many times. I've had a lot of guys work on my cars. Some of them were downright horrible, but I had never questioned their ability based on their gender. But I quickly learned that she actually was, in fact, the best mechanic at the shop. In fact, all the guys, when they were having trouble, they would go to her. So I had some, as they say, I had some egg on my face. But I'm so glad because you know what? In that moment, even as someone who speaks about diversity, inclusion, and getting along and belonging, even in that moment, I recognized that I was biased. So I came here today. You tuned in to hear me tell you, you are biased. Now, oftentimes when I say that, I get one of three answers. I get the, oh, no, Jeff, no, there's no way that I'm biased. There's no way. Sometimes I get the, what? Me? I'm biased? And every once in a while, I get the Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, the, no. But I'm here to tell you that you are biased. All of us are biased. Let's quickly look at the brain. See, our brain has two parts to it. There's a conscious part and a subconscious part. The conscious part is listening to me speak, but the subconscious part of your brain is keeping your heart beating. It's keeping the air going through your lungs. The subconscious part of your brain knows that you're sitting on a couch or your butt's in a seat. It knows you have socks on or slippers on. Your subconscious part of your brain is acting while the conscious part is listening. And oftentimes we store thoughts in our subconscious that sometimes come back up when the situation calls for it. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala. And in the amygdala, that's where we keep our emotions. So if you ever you're at home, you live with your family, you go around the corner and some kid jumps out and says, boo, and they scare you. For goodness sakes, we know that there's no monsters in your house. But that kid who scares you, you know that they live there, but your body reacts. That is your amygdala acting out. That's your emotion. And that's where we keep that emotion. You see, it was so important back in the day when we as human beings were hunting for food. Because if we heard rustling in the bushes, that rustling could mean a saber-tooth tiger, so we were going to be dinner, or it meant that was dinner that we could catch and take home. So our body had to be reactive. Now, my friends, I got to tell you, we haven't hunted for food like that in a long time. In fact, there's a Tim Hortons and McDonald's pretty much on every single corner. But the one thing that hasn't evolved is our brain, the amygdala. Our brain is inundated with so much pieces of information, but we can only take pieces in at certain times. We can only take small pieces of information versus all the information that we get. And so our brain does something called priming. What is priming? Priming is exposure or stimulus to an influence without conscious guidance or attention. So that's basically using information that we have stored in our brain and bringing it out when we think it's necessary. Let me show you an example. We're going to play a little game. I'm going to show you a word, and we're going to say that word together 5 times. And afterwards, I'm going to ask you an immediate question, and I want you to answer that in your home right away. So the word we're going to say together is silk. Let's say it together. Silk, 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 silk. What do cows drink? See, I know we're virtual, but I know some of you said that cows drink milk. And that's why this cow's looking at you like, say, what? My friends, cows do not drink milk. Cows drink water. Now, there's always someone that says, well, Jeff, baby cows drink water. Yeah, I know you just said that. Now you're laughing. I know you just said it. But baby cows are called calves. So cows drink milk. I'm sorry, cows drink water. Cows do not drink milk. but our brain associates cows with milk. We've been learning that since we've been children. Cows give milk. So when I asked you that question, a part of your brain just came up with that answer, even though it wasn't accurate. You see, this is what we do sometimes when we're dealing with other groups and other cultures and other religions that we might not be familiar with and we don't know much about. We go back in our mind and we pull out the information that we know, even though that information may not be right or accurate, even though that information could be fed to you through the movies or media, and we're using it, even though that information isn't right to who people are. And so we do something. Our brains allow us to be biased. We allow stories that we tell ourselves about people. We use those things in efforts of trying to, when we think about someone. But that information isn't necessarily right or accurate to who people are. Where do we learn our biases? There's so many places that we can learn biases, but they kind of all trickle down to three main areas. You see, those areas are the culture, family, and media. All of us are a part of a culture. There's a culture within your city. There's another culture within your province that's a little bit different than the province next door. But then there's another culture that includes all the provinces that's different than the states, United States. There's another culture that includes all of North America that's different than Europe. We're a part of so many cultures. And the cultures, family, influences, media, they play into our thinking. So let's talk about these real quick. So flying through the media, there was a study that was done some time ago, and they took thousands and thousands of TV commercials that we see during our favorite shows, and they broke down the characters by background, by race. They took another study was done with TV shows, and then a third one was done with movies. And they were all done very similarly, where they took the characters in the movies, the commercials, and TV shows, and they broke down the background, the characters by race. And what they found was oftentimes, they found lots of things, but one of the things they found was oftentimes when they're looking to fill a role, they would get someone who was stereotypical of that role. For example, have you ever watched an episode of The Simpsons? I think most of us has. It's probably one of the longest running shows on TV. Tell me, who is the person who works behind the counter at the Quickie Mart? His name is Apu. Apu wears a turban. He is South Asian. This is oftentimes a stereotype that we see on TV. Those who are South Asians will work behind convenience stores. I've seen it on Simpsons, on Seinfeld. I've seen it on a lot of different shows. Sometimes we see the stereotype that someone who's South Asian drives a taxi cab. Again, I've seen that on TV as well. But my friends, if we look at that job in real life, not on TV, we realize that all walks of life work in those positions. Let's talk about cultural conditioning. The culture we live in teaches us to see things certain ways. For example, if you're walking down the street and you see two people holding hands of the same sex, what's the first thought you'd have? Probably that they're in a same-sex relationship. Why is that? Because that's what our culture teaches us. But did you know that there's actually places around the world that you would find two people of the same sex holding hands, not because they're in a same-sex relationship, but simply because they're friends? See, our culture shows us one thing, but their culture shows another. So when you see things, we shouldn't make an assumption, because that assumption may not be right or accurate to who people are. Some time ago, I was in I was in high school, and I got a chance to visit my auntie in London, England. And so while I was there, my culture at that time, my friends in high school, we would always do the sideways peace sign whenever we took pictures, right? So I'm out in England, and all my cousins are taking pictures with me, and I'm doing this sideways peace sign. And my cousins are looking at me strangely, but no one's saying anything. So again, I keep doing the sideways peace sign. One of my cousins comes to me. She says, "Jeff, why do you keep doing that?" And I'm like, "That's what me and my friends do back at home." And she's like, "Jeff, don't you know that's actually considered a swear word?" And I was like, "What?" So I came to understand that just like putting up your middle finger here, in Canada is the same as over there in London, England. But I also came to understand that putting your finger sideways is actually considered a swear word as well. And if I want to do the peace sign, I had to do it the right way up. Just because we learn something from the culture that we're in doesn't make it right or accurate to who people truly are. We get a chance to go to a restaurant, and while we're there, somebody is sitting at a table beside you, and they're slurping their food, they're burping, they're making all these noises. What's the first thought you'd have? Oh man, these people are nasty. Get me away from them. But did you know that there's places around the world that if you eat like that, it's actually considered a compliment to the chef? The chef would likely come out and say, "Wow, clearly you love my food." But you see, when we hear it because of our culture, we believe it's rude, but their culture says it's not. Again, just because we learn something from the culture we've been raised in, it doesn't make it right or accurate to who people are. Let's talk about family influences. Everything we learn when we're born comes from the people who are closest to us. Mom and dad, big brother and sister, it all comes from the people who are closest to us. But we also need to recognize that just because we learn something from those who are closest to us, it doesn't make that information right or accurate either. A couple of summers ago, I was hosting an online class just like this, and for high school students across Canada. And they would all come on my Zoom call, and I would teach a bunch of stuff. I get speakers to come on and teach a bunch of stuff. It was an amazing opportunity. And there was one young woman that was on my calls all the time, an amazing young woman. She was different background than me, different complexion than me. And every week she'd come on the call and she'd learn a bunch of stuff, and she would tell her dad about everything she learned. The next week, she learned a bunch of stuff to her about her dad about everything she learned. Her dad said to her, "Do you mind asking Jeff if I can listen in? Because I'll be honest with you, you're learning things that I don't even know." And so she asked me, "Jeff, do you mind if my dad listens in?" I said, "Absolutely. I'd love to help any way that I can." And so the next week came and she logged into the call, and within about 30 seconds, she logged off. I reached out to her afterwards. I said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And she's like, "Jeff, man, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but I'm no longer allowed to be a part of your calls." I said, "Okay, is everything okay?" And she said, she didn't want to tell me. She was reluctant, but she came out. She said, "Jeff, my dad, he saw you. He saw the color of your skin. And in his opinion, he believes that you're nothing more than a criminal." I said, "Okay." I said, "Can you tell your dad that I've been working with students for over 10 years? In fact, can you also tell your dad that I also work as a police officer? So I'm here to protect and serve and not to hurt and harm. Can you tell your dad that?" She said, "Jeff, I've been trying to tell him all of this, trying to convince him, but he still can't see past the color of your skin." My friends, I share this with you because I want you to understand that this didn't happen in 1922. This didn't happen in 1822. This was 2 years ago, 2022, with a family who lives right here in Canada. And I share that with you, as tough as it is, I share that with you, but it drives me to ask you this next question. And I don't want anyone coming off of mute. I don't want anyone putting their virtual hand up. I simply want you to think of your answer. Just like this young woman, have you heard this type of language in your household? Have you heard grandpa or grandma talk about somebody's body weight? Have you heard uncle make fun of somebody's religion? Have you heard dad make those offside or racist jokes? Because this is the thing, my friends. You see, as family, we get together, we have a great old time, the barbecue's going, we're having a good time, the food is there, and we're having a great time. And everybody's gathered around just having fun, and then dad starts to make those offside comments. Or grandpa starts to make those racist jokes. And we all look at each other and like, man, that's just dad, or that's just uncle, just ignore him. That's just who he's been. But while we ignore him, the babies are in the room. The babies are hearing everything that's being said. And all of a sudden, uncle's offside jokes start to become the baby's jokes. Or dad's comments that we've heard our entire life, those racial comments, they start to become our thoughts. You see, my friends, it's extremely important that we recognize that the information that comes from the people that we love the most, sometimes the people that we would die for, we have to recognize that sometimes that information isn't right or accurate to who people are. And so when we don't have information on people and we allow our assumptions and biases to play in our head, it can make such an impact, a negative impact on the people that are around us. It is so important that we recognize, again, the information we learn from those we love. Sometimes that information isn't right or accurate. Some time ago, I had to rent a U-Haul truck. And in the back of the U-Haul truck, there is sometimes there's a bag. And within this bag is a bunch of moving things. There's tape, there's small boxes, there's wrappings, there's utensils, there's gloves, and it's all in this one big bag. And the bag is held shut with a plastic holder. And if you break open that plastic holder, you can have everything in the bag. You can have one thing in the bag, no matter what it is, but you have to pay for everything in the bag. You pay for the bag. So I borrowed this U-Haul truck one time and I was in a rush. So I saw the bag in the back and it was empty. I took the U-Haul truck, did what I had to do. I came back, totally forgot about the bag. I handed in my keys. Mr. Martin, was everything good? Everything was perfect. And I went on about my way. About a week later, I received a brand new charge on my credit card. I reached out to the company. I said, hey, what's going on? What's this about? They said, oh, Mr. Martin, when you returned the truck, the bag in the back was empty. I said, oh my goodness, I totally forgot to tell you. I'm so sorry that when I got the truck, the bag was empty. They said, hey, Mr. Martin, all we can tell you is that when you took the truck, it came back with an empty bag. That means you have to be charged. You see, I received a bill that didn't belong to me. Some of you right now are receiving bills from the generations before you that don't belong to you. Now, it'd be kind of cool if grandma passed on her recipe for that apple pie she makes, or if mom makes those sugar cookies and she gives you that recipe, then that's all good and dandy. I'll take that bill all day long. But sometimes those bills, the thinking comes from those before us who lived in different times. And because grandpa or dad or whoever it is lived in different times, they react in different ways to people. They may not be as inclusive as we are now in 2024. And so if we're not careful, that thinking, the way that they think, the way that they operate, it may get passed down to us. The question is, what overdue bills continue to get passed down in your family? Because you have an opportunity to break that cycle. You have an opportunity to refuse the bill. So when you decide, if you decide to have your own children, they never have to get that bill that's been passed down from grandpa to dad to you and to your children, because you decided to change the narrative. You decided to not allow the racial comments or the negativity or whatever it is your family has been dealing with, alcoholism, drug abuse, whatever it is. You make the decision to be the cycle breaker in your family. Just because you received a bill, it doesn't mean you have to pass it on. You have what it takes to break it. And so because of our biases and the assumptions we make about people, I show you a picture like this, and I ask you, what are your thoughts? Based on our assumptions and biases, some of us might say, man, they're up to no good, maybe drug dealers. But if you see these same guys in a different light, you actually see that they're doctors doing a lot of great work in the community. I show you a picture like this and I ask you, which one is the athlete? And again, if we go on our assumptions and our biases, we might say it's got to be the guy with the ball. Meanwhile, he's just an actor. The other guy, that's Yao Ming, one of the greatest basketball players to come out of China and to play in the NBA. I show you this picture and I ask you, what are our thoughts about her? Very unassuming. You might see her at the grocery store, maybe at the park. Meanwhile, she's one of the richest people in the entire world. I show you a picture like this and I ask you, which one is a criminal? Again, if we're going on based on our assumptions and biases, we might say it's got to be the guy with the gun and the tattoos. Meanwhile, when we look deeper, he is a self-made millionaire. He's holding a gun because, like a lot of people in the United States, he's a gun enthusiast. He has the tattoos all over his face because he said to himself, I want to create my own business. I don't want to work for anybody. And the days I'm feeling super weak and I feel like I need to go for an interview, I know that nobody will hire me with these tattoos on my face. Now, it's a little far-fetched, if you ask me, but clearly it works for him. The other guy that looks like your everyday college kid, your everyday high school kid, years ago, he went into a church and he killed a bunch of people after praying with them. My friends, when we allow our biases to take the way we think and we use that to guide the way we operate, we can make such big mistakes on the way we treat people. We're not being able to give ourselves the opportunity to see past what just we see on the outside. It's not just about their color, it's about who they are. It's not just about their religion, it's about who they are. It's being accepting of people regardless of what their backgrounds might be. You know, for years I worked as a police officer, and police officers have different terms. You might have heard some of them on shows like Law and Order. One of the terms that a police officer will use is rounder. What's a rounder? That's someone who gets arrested, they get thrown in jail, they come out, they get arrested, they get thrown in jail, they come out, they get arrested, they get thrown in jail. It's like a merry-go-round, a rounder. The term rounder is something I had used as well. Some time ago, I was working in an undercover unit, wearing undercover clothes, driving in undercover cars, and there was a quote-unquote rounder that we knew that was coming out of jail. Once he got out of jail, we sat very close to his house in these undercover cars, and we saw him exit his house and go driving. So we followed behind him. He had no idea. We got to a neighborhood, and he actually got out of his car and started looking in the windows of houses. He found a house that he liked. He rang the doorbell, knocked on the door. Nobody came. He looked inside the window, and then he kicked the door in and ran inside. We watched this entire thing happen like it was a movie. We jumped out of our cars and we ran after him, and he was so shocked to see us in the house. He had no idea we were following him. We took him down and we put handcuffs on him. I got to tell you, this guy was extremely stocky. He was short and extremely muscular. His legs were absolutely muscular. And I remember saying to him, like, dude, bro, like, what are you doing? Like, why do you keep doing this? You keep getting arrested and thrown in jail. Like, can't you do something with your life? Like, look at your body. You're muscular. You can't do construction or I don't know, something. Like, can't you do something with your life? And he looked at me and he said, well, officer, I was doing something with my life. I said, what was that? He said, well, I was a professional rock climber, a mountain climber. And I said, okay, so what happened? He said, well, I fell off the mountain and broke my leg in 3 places. So I had to get a cast, and the doctor put me on medication. I said, okay, what happened next? He said, well, eventually my leg healed, but I became addicted to that medication, those pain meds. I tried to ask the doctor for more, but he wouldn't give it to me. So I started to use recreational drugs. I said, okay, what happened next? He said, well, I ran out of things. I used all my money. I sold all my things. And so I started to break into other people's houses to sell their things to feed my addiction. I said, what happened next? At that point, he held out the handcuffs that I put on him and he said, officer, you know what happened next. Here was someone that I had labeled. He didn't label himself. And oftentimes when we label things, they have a difficult time from coming out from under that label. So because we know that, we should really consider the labels we put on people. See, this was a man that he didn't label himself. I labeled him a rounder. But it wasn't until I was able to hear his entire story that I was able to treat him as a human being that really he's always been. Now, yes, he did break into the house, so he did have to go to court. But I wrote a note for the judge, hoping the judge would also, just like me, see him for the human being that he's always been. My friends, what labels have you put on others? What labels have you put on others? I got to tell you, I have 3 amazing boys. My middle guy just turned 11 yesterday. 11 years ago when he was born, he was actually born early. And we don't know why he was born early. And he's a troublesome 11-year-old now, but he was born early. And at that time, he had to stay in the incubator in the NICU with a bunch of other babies. And my wife would go visit him every moment she could. And I would stay back with my older son, but my wife would be there every moment. But just beside my son, there was another little boy. And that little boy, as he laid in his incubator, my goodness, he twitched the entire time. This little boy was born high on drugs. And every day my wife would be there, every moment she would be there, there was no one that came to see this little boy. Not until one day. One day this woman showed up and the nurses said, oh, please go wash your hands so you can hold your son. And she said, no, I'm good. And she walked over and she stood over that little boy and she stared at him for maybe 15 seconds. Then she turned around and walked away, and she wasn't seen again during the time that we were there. My friends, as I said, my son turned 11 just yesterday. And every time he has a birthday, I'm driven back to that moment when he was born, but I'm also driven to think about that little boy who lives somewhere in Ontario who was born twitching high on drugs. And I think to myself, now that my son is 11, he's 11, I think to myself, how many people have labeled him? How many teachers have labeled him? How many parents of other children have labeled him? How many other students have labeled him without knowing this little boy's entire story? See, the truth is, all of us have a story. but we don't have the time to share everybody's story. But because we know somebody else has a story, then we should consider the labels we put on others. My question to you is, what labels have been put on you? What labels have been put on you? Because the truth is, we know how difficult it can be from coming out from under that label. If someone doesn't like me and I give them $1,000,000, they're just going to be $1,000,000 richer, but they're still not going to like me. So if we know how difficult it can be from coming out from under a label, then maybe we should reconsider the labels we put on others. Maybe we should reconsider the things that we say about others. Maybe we should reconsider the things that we talk about when it comes to other people. It is so important for us to recognize that everybody just wants to be loved. Everybody just wants to have the best life that they can. And then when it comes to our biases and the way we treat people, and when it comes to the labels that we put on other people, it's so important for us to recognize that that person, although they may have a different color skin than me, although their hair might be different than mine, although they may have a different religion or have a different accent than me, that person is a human being that wants to be loved. That person is a human being that just wants the best out of life. None of us can control the things that we have, meaning the things that I like to call as privileges. You see, I couldn't control being born a man. Could not control the color of my skin before I was born. I couldn't control if my parents had $1,000,000 in the bank or zero in the bank. I had no idea what religion what my parents were before I was born, but we use these things as privileges. If we recognize our privileges and use them to help other people, I believe it now becomes our superpower. When we can step past our biases and step past the labels and recognize our privileges and use them to help other people, it now becomes our superpower. I'll give you an example as I close. When I want to go to a restaurant, I think about what's on the menu. You probably do the same. But I have friends who, before they can think about what's on the menu, they think about, is there wheelchair access to the restaurant? If I go to the manager and I say, hey, listen, somebody wants access to your restaurant, but they can't get in because they have a wheelchair, I'm now just scratching the surface of using my privileges as a superpower. All of us have what it takes to step through our own biases, to step through the labels that we put on people, to recognize our own privileges, to use them to help other people. So at this point in time, I just want to encourage you to recognize that even though someone may look different than you, sound different than you, talk different than you, from a different part of the world, all of us, just like you, want to be loved. We all want to grow and just have the best life we can while we're here. So it's important for us to recognize our biases, to recognize the labels that we sometimes put on people, and also recognize the privileges that we were born with and use them to help other people to become better. My friends, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you listening. And if we have time for some Q&A, I would love to answer some of your questions.
Amazing, Jeff. I was hanging on to your every word there. Thank you so much for your incredible talk and all of the kind of relatable bits and pieces. I found myself nodding right along as you talked about, going to the mechanic for your car or watching The Simpsons or even visiting a restaurant, right? It's really eye-opening to see all of the ways that our biases show up in life. And so with that, we are going to keep you for a couple questions.
Of course.
The first one being, I would love to hear from your perspective. What are some things we can do day to day to kind of either avoid or just at the very least be aware of our unconscious biases that, follow us around throughout life?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the truth is all the information that we're fed when we're born comes from an, as I talked about, family, and that's going to include biases. So if we want to be deliberate in terms of stepping through our biases, then I would recommend everybody taking the opportunity to learn about other groups, other cultures that might be different than yours. I don't know where everybody lives who's listening, of course, but major cities like Toronto and Vancouver and some of these major cities, Calgary, many of them have these huge festivals every year. For example, I live just outside of Toronto, so I know they have Taste of the Danforth, which is a huge Greek festival. They have an Italian festival. They have a Filipino festival. They have all these different things that you can go down and really take part. Try the foods, talk to the people, learn about the culture, the clothing. It gives you an opportunity to really learn. If you don't have an opportunity to attend some of those things, again, you have an opportunity to do so through social media, whether it be through YouTube, whether it be just continuous learning on your own. But when we start to learn about other groups, it gives us a chance to learn about them, but really it gives us a chance to learn about ourselves. We grow when we learn about other people.
Yeah, amazing answer. I love that. I'm not far from Toronto either, so I've got some things to add to my list next time I'm in that
Yeah.
area. So thank you for the recommendations. Um, Another question here. So, we'd love to hear more about kind of your take on what we can do to correct others on their biases, right? It's as you talked about it, it does happen. And sometimes those family members or those unpaid bills that are being sent our way may fall on us. So, how can we kind of address those in a way that's still kind hearted and, by giving those people some grace as well?
That is a great question. And in all honesty, this is one of the hardest things to do because now we're talking about speaking out to someone that we love. It's having those difficult conversations sometimes like, hey, grandpa, you know that I love you. But grandpa, I know you grew up in a different time. I know you grew up maybe in a different place, but the way you speak about those people, we don't do that anymore. Uncle, I love you, but the way you speak about those group of people, we can't do that anymore. That's some of the most difficult conversations we can have. But I believe it's also the most necessary conversations we can have as well. Because when we start to have those type of conversation, that person who feels comfortable in making those comments and making those jokes, they're
Mhm.
going to be a little bit less comfortable around you when you have those conversations. And then the second time and third time, they'll be a little bit less comfortable in saying those things. So really, I think it just really is being true to who you are. And again, having those conversations as difficult as they can be, because ideally it's about all of us learning. It's about all of us growing. And when we have those conversations, it shows that person that, yeah, the things that they say, they think it's funny, but it really isn't funny. We really need to curb the way we speak when it comes to the way we deal with other people, other groups that we might not be a part of.
Mhm. I totally see what you mean. Yeah, and I like the idea of leading with love, like you
Yes.
exemplified there. So very, very nice. Okay, we're gonna keep it going here. So, um, especially here in Canada, and I'm sure in other places as well, we see a lot of cultural differences all throughout the communities that we live in and the places that we get to visit right here at home. So, what are some things we can do to avoid unintentionally bringing offense to others around us? Right? We don't want to be that person with the sideways peace sign like you were. So, what are some tips you have to make sure that we are always as respectful as possible when interacting with those who are different from us?
That's a great question because we live in a culture that they said the cancel culture. People are canceled so
Mhm.
quickly, and I think that is such the wrong attitude to have because now people are scared to try things, to do things, to really get involved because they don't want to be quote unquote canceled. The truth is that all of us make mistakes. And along our journey of growing, we're going to make mistakes. There's going to be times that we don't know really what's happening. And so we may say things that aren't intentionally trying to hurt somebody, but because we're in our state of growing, we make those mistakes. Imagine the first time you went to the gym and you see all these, you go to, any major gym in your city, you see some of these machines. I look at them, even me, and I've been around the gym. I look at some of the machines. I'm like, how do you use this thing? I have no idea. And I climb on this thing and I'm doing all these crazy stuff. And someone might look at me and be like, this guy is nuts. I'm making a mistake. But until someone teaches me, until I keep going back to that gym and seeing somebody else doing it, learning how they do it, I now learn myself. And now I can do it 4 or 5 years. I become an expert at this thing. Now I see someone messing up on that machine. I can help them. Any growing that we do, including diversity, inclusion, biases, any growing that we do, we're going to make mistakes along the way. Understand that. And that's giving ourselves grace and having grace for other people to recognize that, you know what, it was a mistake, but at least they're trying. You're going to make mistakes along the way, but we learn from our mistakes and we get better from our mistakes. And then we can use that to help somebody else who's made a mistake as well.
So true. You're right. yeah, it's the effort and the trying piece that's really going to make the difference. So
Yes, it
with that,
will.
we've got one final question for you. We're, again, so grateful for your time with us this evening. So, to
Thank
finish
you.
things off for the night and to kind of keep the conversation going about all of these amazing topics you brought up, what are some resources that we can use or we can pass along to our student leaders watching this in order to kind of continue to bring awareness to our biases and creating a school community that's as inclusive as possible?
That's a great question. One of the greatest resources I've come across, I've done it myself. University of Harvard has a test that you can do, and you can go on Google or any search engine and type in Harvard implicit bias test or Harvard bias test, whatever combination you want to do. You can go onto this website by University of Harvard, and they have dozens and dozens of tests that you can go on to help to see what your biases are. So these tests will kind of give you some questions, and you go through them, and based on the way you do them, it kind of gives you an idea of if you're biased or not. And there's a number of tests. It's not just about race. They have tests on, do you have a bias against obesity? Do you have a bias against ageism? Do you have bias against a number of different things,
Yeah.
languages, things of that nature. Again, there's a number of tests that you can do. I always recommend, do not do this test when you're at work with your boss looking over your shoulder. Do not do this test, when you're at school. You want to do it in the comfort of your own home. And when you do these tests, it's going to, number one, give you an opportunity to learn about yourself, or number two, give you an opportunity to learn about something that you already knew, but you never wanted to admit to. But the great thing is, it gives you a place to start. If you want to lose weight, you go on the scale, you see where you are. I'm starting at this weight. I want to go down to this weight. When you do a test like this, these bias tests, it gives you an idea of where you are. And now you can say, okay, these are the things that I'm going to implement next in efforts of trying to be less biased to the certain group that I might be biased against. So I recommend Harvard Implicit Bias Test.
Oh, I love that. I wrote it down as you were telling us about it. So I'm gonna try
Awesome.
it out myself as well. Amazing. So yeah, Jeff, like I said, this wraps up our questions here. Again, we appreciate your time so very much this evening. Your amazing presentation, all of our great chats that we just had in the last couple minutes. Again, a great eye opener and a really awesome message as we head into the rest of the month here. So thank you once again on behalf of CSLA, our Student Leadership Certification Program. See you next time, student leaders. We look forward to having you at the next masterclass just like this one. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.